Okay, hello guys. This isn't just for TCPers, but of course, you guys are the first people I acknowledge. So this is my vlog, my book review vlog, and because someone I hold in very high regard suggested, or rather asked whether I'll be willing to share my thoughts on a particular title, I've chosen that to be my first title to review. It may come off scandalous, but then anybody that knows me knows I don't mind scandal. And I'm very happy to welcome you to this wonderful title. If you haven't already heard of it, I would recommend that you go find The Atheist Muslim. Can you read that? Can you read that? Yeah? Okay. I've posted about it already on my Instagram page, so if you haven't been following me, you should probably do that. The Empire Legati, I'll drop the handle. And reading this had been, in a way, reaffirming of something I've known, something I've lived through, something I'm still grappling with. Like, I knew about the author before I came across this book, Ritzvi. I knew about him well before I came across the title. So coming across the title was sort of like, a renewed connection, or sort of like a higher level of connection than the one I had with him, which was basically social media. I was following him on Twitter and whatnot. So I'm done reading this, and I have some wonderful things to say about it, and some amazing quotes to dissect. Like, I had to quote a lot of stuff. I was literally reading, partly crying, partly just jotting down stuff and typing stuff on my computer. So that'll be the next step. In the meantime, let's return The Atheist Muslim to the shelf, and then we'll get down to talking about The Atheist Muslim. Alright. Look at this heaven. Just look at this lovely, lovely heaven. I don't know how long it will be until I have covered everything that's on this shelf, but that is not the concern right now. The concern is returning The Atheist Muslim where it belongs, somewhere here. So, there it is, a life-changing book that every one of you has to just go find. Like, you absolutely have to find this. You should. And now on to the dissection of this amazing book. So of course I had to sit down, because talking about The Atheist Muslim is not a light conversation, and it's not something I would have felt comfortable doing standing. So I had to sit down, I had to make myself tea, and I had to get the book back from off the shelf, because I feel like there are things that I cannot do justice to just talking about from my recollection. I need to just access the book before I can do that justice. I feel a desperate need to do to this book, because I don't want to ruin it for anyone. I want you to feel the need to pick this book up and read it after this review, not feel like you don't want to anymore because I've ruined it for you. I don't want to do that. So we are going to start right off from the first chapter, which opened up with the author's recollection of an experience that kind of changed his life in a way. It was an eye-opener. For the first time, he was introduced to the Jewish phobia that the Arabian Peninsula seemed to have. He studied at an American international school in Riyadh at a time when his parents were working in Saudi Arabia, a very oppressive Sharia state. So there was this day they were having a school project of, it's sort of like a Christmas holiday school project, but because it's Riyadh over in Saudi Arabia, they couldn't even use the word Christmas. It had to be winter or holiday break, or winter recital or holiday party and so on. You can't display anything religious like crosses or images of Jesus, but the rest of it is pretty legit. So they had an awesome Christmas party that they couldn't call Christmas party because this is Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is not tolerant of any other religion, which is a question a lot of progressives have been asking. Why is it that the Muslim population tend to request or rather demand for the right to flourish in non-Muslim countries where there are minorities, but in the most Muslim majority country in the world is non-tolerant in the way that most Muslims want to be tolerated in the world? Some may argue that the same applies in the Vatican and the same applies in Israel, but no, not quite. As a matter of fact, I think Jewish people live side by side in Israel, although the Muslim population may say that they don't have a choice. They are smack in the middle of the Middle East after all. So the experience it opened up here with is how they were creating snowflakes, and these are a collection of children from 80 different nationalities. So some of them have never seen snows, like Ali Ritzvi himself, being a Pakistani living in Saudi Arabia. He has never seen snow, and he did say it here. He was like, he wouldn't see snow until he moved to Canada. So he recounted how a government official, who, by the way, like, this is a thing that happens every now and then. Government officials drop by to see how things are going and see that things are going according to, like, these inspections that happen, so that the Ministry of Education would be assured that the school is following the directives they have been given. So he approached the snowflakes on the bulletin board, and he seemed unhappy. I'm not reading verbatim. So, scowling, he turns around to say something to the teacher, and she handed him a pair of scissors at his request. Then he proceeded to snip one of the points of each of these paper snowflakes, leaving the disfigured asymmetrical 5-pointed figures on the board. Not even he didn't even bother to pick up the amputated scraps of paper that had fallen to the floor. And this is a baffling experience because children make beautiful things and they think they're beautiful, they believe they are beautiful, and then an adult seems angry about these beautiful things that they have created and mutilated these things. And they have no idea that these things signify something that the Muslim population in Saudi Arabia are unhappy with: the Star of David, a religious symbol for the Jewish people. So he was introduced to Jewish phobia in 5th grade, Saudi Arabia. And 10 years later, you have an experience that reminded him of that upbringing. A reaction that he had no control over. Someone walked into the CD store he worked at, and the person looked Middle Eastern, and he felt a kinship with the person. But then once they started having a conversation, and the person mentioned back home in Israel, he says here, I start to feel a little cold. I feel my heartbeat racing in my throat. My palms are clammy and my muscles tense up. My ambulatory ability is restricted, and I feel vulnerable. I am in full fight or flight mode, and it shows on my face. I'm sure of it. I don't know how I feel about this. I mean, I grew up in a culture where the Jewish people have been demonized. Basically, a similar culture to his own. He's a Pakistani Muslim who kind of moved around the world from Saudi Arabia to Canada to the US. I'm a Muslim person from Nigeria, the northern region, to be specific, and yet reading through this book opened my eyes to the similarity of our Islamic experience, the struggle to embrace progressivism, because your morality tells you that that's the right thing to do, but then your religious holy book tells you that you can't use your common sense because it's not enough. The word of God is supreme. So at several points, I found myself crying because he was recounting experiences that I grappled with, experiences that had, and I felt a connection with someone out in the world that I never had any chance to meet, and probably me never, although I would very much like to. So he moved on to his experience post 9/11. That was the attack that happened on the Twin Towers in the United States. Post 9/11 was a time when I was very young. That was in 2001. I was 2 years away from being 10. Yeah, I just gave away my age. We'll be fine. So at that point in time, I didn't know much, but I knew that there was celebration in the air, in the streets of Kano. People were celebrating, and people were talking about how they have shown the Americans. Finally, they have gotten what they deserve. And I did not understand deeply the magnitude of human tragedy that happened until much later, until several years later. Thanks to conspiracy theorists that couldn't keep quiet about 9/11, I found myself watching several videos of the whole event on YouTube, and the magnitude of the tragedy set in, and I felt differently about the whole thing then, and I understood how horrible it is to celebrate the death of hundreds of people that you have no idea about, hundreds of people whose humanity you have completely denied simply because of something that their governments have done. So it was awful. Anyway, so I have several quotes here that I'm going to just read through, and I'm not here to answer any questions. Ali didn't attempt to answer any question. And the whole thing about knowledge and just seeking understanding is that ultimately you may not get answers. And Ali did beautifully point that out at some point towards the end of the book. Something about how the thing about the quest for knowledge is that it's never ending. In an attempt to answer one question, you end up opening the door to several. So ultimately, the beauty is in this seeking of the knowledge and understanding itself, and not necessarily in finding the right answers. Of course, you gain understanding and move on to higher levels. That's the goal. So right onto the quotes, I'll just read through them. If I have anything to say about it, I will. If I don't, I will just read the next one. So my first quote has something to do with the struggle of the progressive Muslim. In a fast-changing world, most of us choose to just go with our inborn morality rather than what the Holy Book says. But then the question is asked of whether that is the right thing to do, and it puts the progressive in a corner, and one may find themselves thinking, what's the point? I'm trying to do the right thing, and people are saying that I have to pick a side. But here's the thing, you have a struggle, you deal with it. Nobody is going to deal with your struggle. So just deal with your struggles. Do what you feel is right. If ultimately choosing a side is what you absolutely have to do, you do it. Some of us have, and we are living. First quote here says, if everyone cherry picks, can one cherry pick all the way into non-belief status? If one can be, say, a feminist Muslim or an LGBT Muslim, LGBT being lesbian, gay, bi, trans, the queer community, can one not be a secular or even an atheist Muslim? Which is the question this entire title kept asking all through. The idea is just the idea that perhaps it's possible the same way there are atheist Christians, who are basically people who identify with the Christian culture and tradition and would celebrate Christmas, but ultimately, if you ask them whether or not they believe in the Christian God, they would say no. So he kept asking the question of whether it's possible, because there are people who are so deeply attached to the culture and tradition of the Islamic religion they grew up in and with, that they don't want to be dissociated from it. And yet part of them is telling them that, you know what, the right thing to do is to do this, but then they are too deeply attached to just move on. So is it possible for them to just be part of the culture but not necessarily identify with the underlying philosophy? That's a question for you to ask yourself. Subsequent quote. It says, but when anything can mean anything, everything becomes meaningless. And this I found especially profound. I remember reading it and thinking, wow, this is so real and so sort of shocking in a way, because yeah, if you decide to cherry pick and just choose whatever you like and what you drop what you don't like, you're basically saying anything can mean whatever you want. And if that is the case, if anything can mean anything, clearly everything becomes meaningless, because we no longer have a factual thing. We just have what we want. The subsequent one says, faith begins with a definitive conclusion believed to be correct, such as Jesus is the Son of God, or Muhammad is Allah's messenger, and then it works backward. Cherry-picking pieces of evidence or perceived evidence in an attempt to support it. And faith, such a beautiful word. To be honest, that's been so disabused of its beauty by the faithful in the religious sense that you find it hard to find the earlier in the word anymore. You can have faith that this cup of coffee right here is actually delicious, possibly because I made it with milk. But then the word faith is dropped, and the first thing that comes to mind is this terrible thing that makes people do the worst of things, like a blind, unquestioning belief in a set of ideas that makes you bend your morality over backwards in so many folds just so that you fit into a box created for you by your organized religion. Next quote says, faith is at the very least unnecessary and at most a net negative for humanity. This obviously is Ali's opinion, which I find profound and something to think about. So if you don't think so, it's up to you, and if you care to think about these things, good for you, go for it. Next quote says, faith is glamorized as a virtue by the religious, but it shouldn't be. Faith is not a virtue, a preference maybe, but never a virtue. Really, unfounded acceptance, like basically just unfounded ideas accepted as facts, even when clearly you can discount them as non-factual. That shouldn't be appealing to anybody, to be honest. But then religious sometimes keep aside common sense and go with faith, which is up to you. If you want to do that with your life, then please have at it. But then don't come here and say that faith is something glamorous or so wonderful. Perhaps thinking faith, like questioning faith that doesn't blindly just accept things, but faith that says, you know what, God Almighty did not create me with this amazing brain that has over 100 billion neurons that are constantly working all through my life, only for me to keep it aside and read what a book written by Middle Eastern goat herders in the 7th century. Like, really? Come on, think about it. God didn't give you that gorgeous brain so that you wouldn't use it. That is an affront to God. You are literally insulting God. Think about that. Next quote says, bigotry against bigotry is not bigotry, and tolerance of intolerance is intolerance. Intolerant attitudes that are unacceptable in general life shouldn't suddenly become acceptable when presented under the gaze of religion. The statement, "This is my faith," should not automatically confer immunity on the faithful for misogyny, bigotry, discrimination, or the irreversible mutilation of the genitals of completely healthy babies unable to give consent. This is just so deep. This is deep. When I first read it, my reaction was, yes, thank you for saying it. Thank you so much. Because we have a case where progressives want to talk about things, but then liberals are all up in our business talking about how this is Islamophobic, this is the Islamic culture, you can't say that, you are being hateful of a group of people. But questioning ideas is not racism. So you're not helping the progressive that is trying to identify with liberal ideals when you are putting them down, telling them that this is Islamophobic. For the love of God, this is our thing. So if we tell you that there's a problem and we want to talk about it, you're going to allow us to talk about that thing. Listen if you want to be of help. This only gets more interesting, by the way. So these next few codes are kind of related in a way. They are talking about the same thing. This one says, if one is to believe that a book is the infallible word of a flawless God, there is no latitude for error, none whatsoever. I mean, infallible word of a flawless God. You can't have error, right? Yet, the Quran is very widely misquoted. And the next quote says, if any other book was as widely misunderstood as the Quran is claimed to be, or misinterpreted, what would you think of the author? You might think he is either exceedingly inarticulate or incompetent. Indeed, a Venn diagram of the two descriptors would be indistinguishable from a circle to the naked eye. Think about that. And this one says, a few good ideas in a bad book like Mein Kampf, written by Hitler, don't make the whole book good. Conversely, a few bad ideas in an otherwise good book don't necessarily make the whole book bad. This dynamic, however, changes dramatically with books that claim divine authorship or even divine inspiration. So that's the difference, basically. That idea that this is divinely authored and cannot be challenged. Whereas we can just say Mein Kampf is written by an asshole who deserves whatever he got, fuck Hitler. You can't do the same with holy books. You can't be like, I'll let your mind do the thinking. And we have a problem in the Islamic tradition of the Prophet having supposedly married a very young wife and consummated the marriage at, some say 9, some say 15, the Shiites say 18 or 19. Yet, and I prefaced this quote, I was like, whether he married Aisha at 6 and consummated the marriage at 9, or at 15, 18, or 19, bracket closed, not being able to burden the Prophet with any error. Ali did right, not being able to burden Muhammad with any error. So I'm putting that slight respect for my viewers from the north who would find just mentioning the Prophet's name so offensive. Sorry about that, darlings. Not being able to burden Muhammad with any error for being a 53-year-old that married a child creates barriers not only to open debates but to justice, which is the problem that we have, because we can't have this conversation, because then that will be questioning the Prophet's deeds, just saying that he did the wrong thing. We have people still marrying really young children and claiming that the Prophet did it, so it's right, which is very wrong. So we have to reach that point where we say, you know what, this is wrong, whether or not the Prophet did it, and then take it from there. But that's up to us to reach that place, and we will. I believe deeply that we will. And then we have this culture of Shaheed, Shahada. A lot of people pray to die Shaheeds. which is basically martyrs in English. So when Muslims glorify shaheeds, this God said, or the martyrs, they celebrate death over life. And we do that, and they should be aware of how toxic this idea is when people really deeply believe it. And we do this, we make this life, there's a hadith that says, this life is a prison for the mu'min and a paradise for the unbeliever. Yet when you look at things, you see that that is not true. It's like can be hell for the non-believer as well as the believer. So these are very easily discernible. You don't even need deep thinking to see it. Just look around you and boom, you see the untruth of it. I will close with this. Secularism, which is what we are supposed to be practicing as a nation, allows both freedom of and freedom from religion. This is important to remember. It's not only allows citizens to practice their religion freely, but also protects the freedom of others to challenge it, and I would like to add, to reject it. Unequivocally, people should be able to reject a religion. No biggie. That's why we are a secular nation. But of course, we have laws in our constitution that are being dictated by a religion. So we need to do better as a country. Nigeria, we're watching you. You need to do better. And that's it. Like, there are so many more quotes, but I suppose over the course of the days to come, I'm going to be sharing them every now and then. Of course, at every point, giving credit to Ali Ritzvi. Thank you so much for this book. Thank you. It has been wonderful. And if you haven't read it, you need to go find it. And tell me what you think about it. Please share what you think about it, not necessarily with me, but with everyone. Share, tweet about it, write on Facebook, make a short video on Instagram, anything, just share. And you can share with your friends and your loved ones too. We need more people to think clearly about religion, not with sentiments. I do have a lovely start of year. 2019 is going to be amazing. Take care.